Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to look at the weekly metagame breakdown for the historic best of 3 format. I'm still getting over the flu, so please bear with my voice. I'm going to try to mute and hopefully not cough for this video. But we are going to look at what's happening in historic. It's not a huge amount of data for this week. We're getting a little bit of noise in part because the alchemy drop Tarkir came out within the week, so our data pool is kind of truncated right now. So I've pieced together, focused less on like the win rates this week. These are just more viable deck options that can win right now. The order, I had to piece it together a little bit more disjointed in this video. But we're getting the data from Untapped.gg, companion tool that tracks user win rates, gives a bunch of cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description. I will paste and timestamp all these deck lists in the video description as well. So even with just kind of the refresh, we don't have kind of a trend right now. Normally we'd look at the metagame share, but I'm just going to jump into it. Boros Auras, we got pretty stock list. We have Luris Companion here. The biggest difference between a lot of the lists is whether you're mainboarding Amped Raptor or if you're mainboarding Hushbringer. Hushbringer, so like when I play this deck in best of 1, I usually mainboard Hushbringer. Shuts off pretty much everything out of the energy deck from an ETB perspective. Shuts down mono green, random combos that have enter the battlefield effects. It's also just a lifelink flyer with some built-in evasion if you have to go to plan B. Amped Raptor is better in grindier matchups when your opponent has lots of removal, stuff like that. It works out fairly nicely just to provide you some virtual card advantage. The core of this deck is you're looking at Core Spirit Dancer, Light Pause. Both cards benefit from you playing auras. Light Pause is basically a toolbox that lets you search for specific auras. You'll notice a number of one-ofs. Core Spirit Dancer scales and gets bigger and then draws you more cards as well. You have Protection with Giver of Runes, and then Esper Sentinel as card advantage. But basically things like Sheltered by Ghosts for removal, Shard Mage for protection, Vigilance, Haste, Flying, and big pump of damage in terms of power as well. In your sideboard, the Hushbringers, like I said, for enter the battlefield effect decks. Portable Hole, cheap removal, good in mirrors, activated abilities, naming Sorin's, for example, protection in Lauren's Escape, Fragment as cheap removal, Tormont's Crypt as graveyard hate. We then go to Simic Eldrazi, 81%. So this deck here is a base colorless deck that's splashing mainly green. It is also a Karn deck, so you have access to a Karn board. So very little sideboarding would be done in this deck here. You get the card advantage or the kind of ramp through Uggin's Labyrinth. You can imprint it with a 7 CMC or greater. Lets you tap for 2 mana on early turns. And then from there, you also have like Sowing Mycospawn that can be used to help you ramp, find you a bunch of key lands. Cavern for Uncounterable, Phyrexian Tower can be ramp. You have Shifting Woodlands that can basically become a copy of something out of your graveyard as well. Blast Zone as removal, as an example. Utopia Sprawl is another way to ramp on 1. You have Mind Stone in here. Malavin Rumble makes you Eldrazi that helps you ramp. Kozilek's Command is a very flexible card. It lets you ramp, draw cards, exile stuff, or exile graveyards. Uggin's Binding is kind of a front half. You bounce something, back half when you cast 7 or CMC or more. You get to cast it kind of for free, and it lets you just Cyclonic Rift your opponent's board. Karn lets you get to your Karn board, which we'll touch base on. You have new Ugin, you have old Ugin, you have the Eldrazi's on the top end. Null Drifter can be early game as just kind of bridging, drawing you some cards. Late game, big body that draws you cards. Then Devour Destiny helps you set up your early draws to help you find the Uggin's Labyrinth. And then it's also kind of removal when you cast it for 7 mana. In the Karn board, you have Portal to Phyrexia, good against auras, like kind of go tall decks, grindier decks, Cityscape Levelers, targeted removal, God Pharaohs against any sort of like Storm style deck, anything with cheap spells that's looking to cast multiple spells per turn, or even against control, it's pretty reasonable. Sky Sovereign is removal, Forsaken Monument for ramp as well as life gain, One Ring for card advantage, Torpor Orb for ETB effects, Stone Brain take out combo pieces, Liquid Metal Coating in Karn lets you blow up lands or shut off activated abilities. You have Artifact Enchantment Hate, Graveyard Hate, and then 3 Chalice. You can lock out the Luris decks. Putting it on 1 and then 2 makes it so they basically can't cast anything out of their deck. So Izzet Wizards, 82%. So this deck got a couple upgrades. We have Swiss Spear's Teaching, very strong card that came out of the most recent Alchemy set. Gives you a one-time boon. The next creature you cast gets Prowess and Haste. Prowess does stack, so you can have multiple instances of Prowess. Plays very nicely with Dreadhorde Arcanist, immediately letting it attack. And you can just, the more spells you cast, the more haste you kind of get out of it. There's a couple different versions. You can play around with it, but this is also playing Corey Steelcutter. Play 2 spells, you get Monks, and it kind of takes over the game that way there. Expressive Iteration in this one, no Flame of Anor in this particular build. A little just lower to the ground, more aggressive. I wouldn't play Desert Cenote. It's a tap land on half the time, depending if you're on play draw. I would just play either like Prismatic Vista, to play some more basics, play a Den of the Bugbear if you want, something of that nature. I just think it's situationally, you can't afford tap lands in this deck. You have the Jengantha Companion, Tormod's Crypt for Graveyard Hate, Floodmaw, cheap counter, activated abilities, Shove Aside as a way to deal with just cheap removal. Stern Scolding is another counter for cheap creatures, Lurrus Piles, Pyroclasm for energy, negate. I would actually consider Torpor Orb in some numbers. I found playing this in best of one at least, just trying out different builds to get a feel for it. It struggles very hard like into the Sorin decks. You don't have great interaction, and a Resolve to Lenda just is such a swing in terms of tempo. You don't really have clean answers for it, where at least the ETB component shuts off a lot of what's happening there. Even Torpor Orb's good against the energy decks, Mardu Sac decks, stuff of that nature. We have Jeskai Lotus control. So this one here is basically leveraging the Strict Proctor, which when you have Lotus Field come into play, the trigger goes on the stack, you don't respond, so you don't have to sack the Lotus Field. So this lets you ramp up ahead. You also have the ability with Flage that you don't have to escape Flage. It doesn't get sacrificed. So 3 mana doesn't do anything when it comes into play, but then you have a Flage that's active. It also works with Null Drifter, where you evoke it and then you don't have to sacrifice it for value. Otherwise, it's kind of a Jeskai control deck. Bunch of cheap removals, Stifle effects in both Consign to Memory and Stifle. Consign's another card you might want in the Wizards sideboard. Very good against the Eldrazi deck. Mainboarding it is incidentally quite strong. And then Teferi's, Lorien Revealed's on the top end stuff. Arena of Glory lets you haste out Flage as well from the graveyard. Tajik for the kind of control mirrors, anything with like black-based removal, quite hard for them to deal with. Wrath the Skies, catch-all removal, really good against energy. Test Talents for some of the combo decks. Dovin's Veto, cheap counter. Aether Gust, red-green decks. Surgical for combo hate, and then Consign, anything with a lot of ETBs or the Eldrazi decks. So Izzet Lotus, another Lotus Field deck, but a different version. This is a combo version. So what it's doing here, you are trying to use Expedition Map to find you copies of Lotus Field. You do have Stifle and Consign in this deck to do the trigger. You also have Deserted Temple, which can be used to untap Lotus Field. And then you're basically going to combo off tap and tap. You have Artist's Talent that lets you basically churn through your deck, discarding stuff. Pour Over Pages lets you draw a discard. And then Untap Lands, Hidden Strings lets you untap lands. Through all that, you're going to net mana. And then eventually you're going to cast Underworld Breach. And then kind of go through there as well. And then just recast stuff over. And then eventually you wish. And then you wish for Tendrils of Agony. And then you Storm Kill your opponent. You can also just draw out your deck and win with Jace as well, in case they have something like Leyline. You have another copy of Underworld Breach that you can wish for. You have a copy of Tome Scour if you need stuff to more mill you. Tome Scour with Breach lets you just kind of keep filling your hand so you can mill over your deck, then eventually cast Wish and then win with Jace again. Divine Purge for the aggressive decks. Stone of Erich for the sack decks. Orin's Chant be used as kind of a silence style effect. And then Flood Mod deals with most of the common hate pieces. We have Temur Devotion, which is really mono green Devotion with Temur Battle Crier. So your regular Devotion shell, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx with Kiora, generate a whole bunch of mana, yada yada. We've been here before. Temur Battle Crier is interesting because during your turn, spells you control cost 1 less for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. With Karn, you're basically able to set up a combo. This is all spells, so Karn basically would be free if you have enough power. Karn goes into your sideboard, gets Ancestral Statue. It's free to cast over and over and over again, bouncing itself. You basically generate like infinite kind of storm in a way. You bring it back to hand, then you cast Karn. The last time you bounce the Karn goes and gets Aetherflux Reservoir. Aetherflux Reservoir gets cast, and then you cast any spell, and then you gain like the life, and then you basically win that way there. So that's kind of the core of the deck there. You can also just draw your deck, get a second copy of Karn with the statue. Then very similar Karn board to the Eldrazi deck, Chroma's Memorial in this case, because you put a bunch of creatures out. You can haste them out. Mindslaver takes over your opponent's turn. You can get the copy of it from exile back with Karn. And then just a lot of the kind of overlap cards there. This is basically the same deck. We have Esper Sorin. So this one was from about a week ago before the set released. For whatever reason, Sorin decks are hard to come by on the format. They're very popular, but finding consistent deck lists. Few variations. There's Abzan versions. There's this Esper version. There's Black-White version. There's actually a Sultai version going around with Ulamog, but a lot of the combos are oops all combos in one. So obviously we have Sorin, Elenda. Sorin you put into play. Elenda is the big powerhouse. Just kind of takes over the game. You're drawing, discarding with Psychic Frog and Diviner Fates, lets you curate, and then you can also self-mill with Overlord of the Balemarks, put cards into your graveyard. Ideally Ulamog. You have the backup plan with Emperor of Bones. Emperor of Bones can come into play, exile the Ulamog, haste it out, it sees its counters, and then you just like attack, it deals 17 damage, and then it annihilates their board. Diviner Fate draws you cards off discards as well, which is kind of cool. Dedicated Dollmaker can blink any of your important ETB effects, blink the Overlord, blink Witch Enchanter, stuff like that. Ulamog for the fair decks like Mono Green, just a way to deal with them. Vein Ripper for the sacrifice decks, anything with small creatures dying. Temporary Lockdown for the aggressive decks. Peddler's Hand Hate. Disruptor Flute is kind of a Pithing Needle effect, Hand Hate, Sack Hate, and then more removal with Fragment Reality. Sorry. A couple community decks are just updates that came through. Just give me one sec. All right, we muted in time. Sorry, I'm still trying to get over this. I'm trying to get the videos out. Not feeling the best. So S460 went 12-0, Mardu Sacrifice. We had Mardu Sacrifice before. The big card playing here is Voice of Victory. Voice allows you to have kind of a silence during your turn. Your opponent can't cast spells. Lets you resolve your Johnny or whatever, kind of combo it that way. Also makes multiple bodies per turn. They're red permanents for Johnny, and then they can be sacrificed to bombardment and then drain your opponent with the Marionette Apprentice. So it's pretty stock list. Just various removal options, Hand Hate, Thule Nightmare for grindier elements, Raven Charm, very flexible card for a bunch of different pieces. We then go to another Sorin pile. This one's from Chris 10-0. Sorry again. So it's kind of a very light Jund. So you have your Sorin package. This version here, you have assembled a team that helps you dig for the combo. Jarsoul can cast stuff from the graveyard. One of my favorite cards. Just a really cool designed card. You have Abundant Harvest, lets you dig for specific pieces. You have Break Expectation as Hand Hate, along with Thoughtseize, so just a bunch of discard. You have Abrupt Decay, deals a lot of hate pieces, Pillage the Bog, and Assemble, so it's very much digging deep into the Sorin Elenda combo to find it as quick as possible, and then using Jarsoul to kind of rebuy stuff later. Dampening Sphere against Mono Green, Lotus Field, stuff like that. Abrupt Decay, just more removal, is pretty flexible, could deal with hate pieces. Surgical for combo hate, Stone for sacrifice decks, activated abilities, more Hand Hate and Duress, and Cut Down for cheap removal. And then lastly, we have Dimir Unearth Ulamog, 3516. This one is from Shuk Trupa. So very similar idea. The core is Emperor of Bones and Ulamog to cheat it out. Psychic Frogs in here. You're self-milling with things like Founding a Third Path, drawing, discarding with Chart a Course, bunch of kind of cheap interaction. You have Unearth to bring back stuff. And then like Tainted Indulgence another way. So basically churning through your deck, and then you'll cheat out Ulamog and then annihilate them. You can get out of the graveyard game, play more just kind of Dimir mid-rangey tempo with like Snapcaster Mage, Sheoldred. Kalidas was good against the sacrifice decks, exiles and you get zombies. Shelly's Edict, just flexible card against the Gotal decks. Surgicals, kind of combo hate, Spell Pierce, Cheap Disruption, and then Cut Down included in here as cheap removal. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking. The qualifier next month is Historic, so we'll be covering this a little bit more as well. And then there is a link to a upcoming Historic community tournament in the comment section if you want to play in that as well. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.